on this page.
Eric, I'm like you, so when I get there, I will get that title. So
thank you. Thank you.
Julius, Apollo, welcome, Kipta, Jimmy, Annette. Okay, so friends, this 1 hour today, Radha is here already. Radha, how is Nepal? We haven't shared or exchanged in a while. Please say hello.
Hello, everyone. Good morning.
Good morning.
I am from Tribhuvan University, Nepal,
Yes.
PhD scholar. It is my second year. I am doing in women entrepreneurship policy analysis. That is my topic. I am gaining a lot from this forum. So I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for joining me. I'm always grateful with you all, professors, colleagues, and with this forum. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Radha. Radha, just one more small question on the research line. Where have you reached?
I'm writing. I'm writing literature review and collecting side by side, collecting data.
Right. Wonderful. Okay. That's right. So the other students will go sharing with each other slowly. So this morning, students, I don't know if you can see anything from me. Teresa, can you see anything from my side?
This is Mario.
Yes, I
can see something.
Yeah,
okay.
What determines the choice of estimation analysis?
Right. So my fellow students actually came with this question, and I decided to throw it to us this morning to share ideas and tips and experiences. We are always writing, we are always collecting data. She came and asked, so above all things, how do I know which estimation and approach, which technique, which analysis is going to inform my work? Are there any tips? Are there any ways of, even when I'm still at proposal level, how do I know that this method is the one that is going to be suitable for my analysis, for my work, not only the thesis, but even a paper which you are writing for publication or any other kind of research that we are always doing. So I thought we as students could also take our thoughts here and share with each other. We are coming from different backgrounds, but generally this is still research. So from my perspective, I just attempted to answer this question according to, where I come from and my background and the issues I've read here and there. But this is not boilerplate. This is not all. There are so many other tips that we can, tell each other here for going forward. So we are going to talk about this question this morning, and maybe our seniors can also join in with some questions. I'll just be randomly, picking on any of you to just add on this or bring from your work? Where are you for those who have reached this level? So, but from what I know, again, this is my unqualified response to this question. It does not mean this is all or this is the absolute truth, but generally, from what I've seen, for whatever research question, your topic, your objective, or whatever, there are two broad tips or guidelines here. Number one is, which is actually the fundamental, is what we call your dependent variable or your criterion variable or your major variable for your study or thesis in this case, is the one that informs you what you are likely to estimate, what you are likely to analyze. And it is shaped by so many ideas around it. One, it is the theoretical, sometimes leans on the theoretical foundations of what you're studying. If it is poverty or welfare or farm performance or whatever, there is a theoretical explanation that we possibly all here know or are now aware of, that informs what your dependent variable is. So theoretically, come from that angle might already give you a guide why you are going to choose this estimation approach or over the other, or why, because from literature you have seen it has been done like this. But most importantly, the theoretical framework that you are leaning on is a very good explanation around that particular idea. Two, sometimes through your own conceptualization, which is conceptual framework, where you are deriving a construct or your dependent variable, you add the context-specific views from your thinking. Against welfare in Uganda, what does that mean? Or if it is ethics in Uganda or ethics in Japan. So the conceptualization around your dependent variable also in any way gives you a hint on what you are likely to estimate. Three, which is usually or broadly, influencing your choice of analysis of your dependent variable, is the measurement. Some people call this operationalization. How are you measuring it? Is it continuous units? Is it a choice or model approach? Is the question you are raising, or the dependent variable, is it the dimension is under it? Are they going to be measured in terms of continuous variables like units? I mean, kilometers or kilograms or number of schools or number of hospital beds, etc. Or is it going to be a categorical or a choice variable where asking people to rank to show that this is performance is high or performance is low? Or is it an index where you are going to tell people above 10 you are rich and below 10 you are poor, in that kind of context that you are going to do? So that's why that section usually in manuscripts and even our work is always very fundamental. Fine, you are saying this is a financial inclusion. So how are you measuring financial inclusion? Are you going to count the number of bank accounts somebody has and then you say that they are financially inclusive? Or are you going to be looking at other issues or items that are leading to that? And already that tells you or gives you a hint on what estimation approaches you're likely to look at or use for your work. The other, again, broad tip is usually collapses to data. And conventionally, they are, defined across so many issues. We have time series data, we have cross-sectional data. Some of us are collecting data right now. You should know what type of data you are working with. We have panel data, or some people are collecting categorical data for your dependent variable again. Now, I must mention that what determines actually your choice of any of these, even under these two broad ideas, still is the dependent variable. Your model, your theory is not about the independent variables. It is the dependent variable in this context that we are looking at. So while the independent variables, because you have almost, you can manipulate them, but to a certain degree, most of these are already given or are responses that you take. You can only influence your your dependent variable depending on how you're defining or doing it. So again, these are, and for reference or just repeating this, I think we've had sessions here about this whole meaning of this data types, but I just put them here for reference. Time series, we are talking about data that is carrying those time varying characteristics. So I'm collecting data about vehicles in Uganda, or vehicle sizes or vehicle colors in Uganda, depending on what you want to do with them. But you are looking at these over time, period to period. Could be every 1 week, every 1 month, every 1 year, every 1 quarter, any particular period of time, and usually this period of analysis is defined, either quarterly or monthly, or sometime data is very disaggregated to where you may need to collect data every 1 hour, for instance, for very high frequency data or indicators that you may be looking at. So, but for as long as it has those time varying characteristics, then that already tells you that you are going to be walking through or looking through that series. It is a whole host of models or estimation and techniques that are usable or defined for data which has time varying characteristics. So, once I'm looking at data of this nature, then my estimation approach or analysis is going to be on time series models. And so, of course, under those, there are so many, depending on, again, unique requirements that you need to perform. When we say time varying estimation models, not one, there are several things under that, including ordinary OLS is also, ordinary squares is also part of that class of estimation methods. Now, depending on how short or how frequent your data is, or how characteristics of your approach is, there are so many softwares will give you time series models that you can look at, each defined for one purpose over the other, that you can always mention. The second class that we know is cross-sectional data, and here you are looking at the data or characteristics all collected on the videos or on any cross-section, which could be any unit or definition, but at a given point of time. So you are looking at schools, you are looking at farmers, you are looking at households, you are looking at companies, but only at a given point in time. And so at that particular time, most surveys that we know take this kind of explanation. The data we always going out using whatever method you are collecting at a point in time on any agents. is a cross-sectional one, but which is actually the most thorough data set for analysis that you can mention. It almost has no limit of which approach brings what, but there are so many, again, approaches and that you can choose from to analyze. But this, again, is dependent on your, is dependent variable or option that you are making. The third one is what we've also talked about here as the panel models. In short, we are looking at a cross-section which is observed more than once in terms of time. You get two households, you observe them in 2010, you observe them in 2015, you observe them in 2020, you observe the same households in 2030. That is, those households observed over time repeatedly is what makes a panel. So every single wave is a panel. So when we put those 5 waves or whatever you are looking at for that particular case, that's why you are seeing a single cross-section, but in different time periods. And that's what we'll be talking about panel data. I think we talked about this again for some of us who have been here. And you tell the characteristics. There are also models that are used for estimation of that panel data, fixed effects, random effects, correlated random effects. Those are all options when you are dealing with the panel data, and there are requirements behind that. There are steps involved in also doing that. Again, the choice of which particular or specific approach goes back to the characteristics of behavior of your dependent variable, which tells you you should do this. What you know is the option here is like accommodates for both cross-sectional and time series characteristics. That's what panel data is all about. So you are going to observe, we are going to analyze whatever you are looking at, putting in mind that you report characteristics of your cross-section, but also with the time varying characteristics. And that is what makes a panel data unique from the others. And then 4, again, depending on your data variable, there is data where you cannot allocate a specific unit, but rather it represents the presence or absence of a given characteristic of whatever things you are going to be looking at. So the numerical value or assignment may have a formula or not, but it does not represent the intrinsic value of that variable or condition. Rather, it is just defining a characteristic of that variable, and which you mostly refer to as categorical variables. If your dependent variable, for instance, you are asking respondents to say yes or no. They are just responding to your question, yes or no, or it is having 2 options or binary choice. The dependent variable, mark my word here again, it is the dependent variable, not the independent variables. If your dependent variable is going to be answered with yes or no, or your dependent variable is the answer by category of choices, for instance, 1 up to 5 or 1 up to 10, it's just choices, it doesn't represent whatever it is. For instance, you're asking people to rank 10 shopping centers or 10 household items, so you list them. So you are not, will not have a true measure of value of that in terms of kilograms or weights or monetary terms, but rather you're asking people to rank in these 5 items depending on what you want to analyze. So if your dependent variable is going to behave in that manner or characteristic, then we are talking about dummy or categorical variable, and therefore you are likely to choose from a list of estimation models, sometimes called limited dependent models or choice models, that are likely to help you analyze such qualitative variables for your work. Right, so friends, we are all students here. I'm going to pause this for now, but get back to us and see how you share your experiences and what you think in this particular context. In no particular order, where you feel like make reference to your work. Why are you using that? Does it also align with that? And maybe any other issue that we are likely to have. So in the next 28 minutes or so, I just want to let this free flow. You can also ask a question, a fellow student might also help you answer back in this context. Teresa, do you want to go? Which data are you working with and what are you analyzing anyway? Very generally. And maybe why?
It's okay. Thank you. Thank you, Bernard. Thanks for that presentation. I'm doing a cross-sectional panel data because I'm looking at earnings quality, and why I was using that because I'm looking at a certain period. I'm looking at around 9 years, and I wanted to see the behavior of this earnings quality with the introduction of integrated reporting, which is now the hot thing in the accounting area. And I want to see for that period of 9 years, how has this earnings quality behaved and by introduction of these other variables, is there any improvement for the period of 9 years? That's why I was looking at that cross-section panel data. Thank you.
Are they farms? Are they schools? What are they?
They are listed farms in the whole of East Africa. So I'm looking at these listed farms in East Africa, whereby it's mandatory that they must all have audited financial statements, and therefore information is available, fine. They must produce them, fine, but then, so what? They have earnings quality. The issues have been there. What is happening? Research has been done around there. Now that we have introduced the aspect of integrated reporting, is there any effect? Is it improving on that earnings quality for that period of 9 years? Actually, the period of 9 years, since the period when integrated reporting was introduced in the year 2013, that comes to year 2021, the period of 9 years. So I'm trying to see, I tried to see what effect would earning quality have improved by the introduction of these other variables. So the study was trying to see the behavior of this earning quality for that period of time. Because as we are looking at the period of time or the choice of the estimation of analysis, the emphasis is just on the dependent variable, the earnings quality.
Exactly. That is exciting. Thank you for that. Maybe one other last question, Teresa. Why those 9 years? Is there anything peculiar?
Yeah, sure. There was a reason why I picked the 9 years. I as much as, yes, my concentration is on the dependent variables, but I wanted to see the what effect or improvement or maybe an improvement on the quality of earnings. I'm looking at integrated reporting, which was instituted by International Accounting Council of Integrated Reporting in the year 2013. So I could not do earlier than that or later than that because my interest was during that period when integrated reporting was into place. What effect has it brought into this earnings quality? Has it been any improvement, and therefore is it worth for companies in East Africa or for the listed companies or others to embrace the aspect of integrated reporting? Is it improving this earnings quality so that it is worth, or we can be able to give advice to these different firms out there and enable them to know the importance of integrating or ensuring that companies actually prepare and produce integrated reporting, so that we're showing them how much effect it will have or improve on the earnings quality.
Wonderful. So I asked you to answer that question so that somebody else can also learn from your experience. Again, selecting, you need a justification, just the way we justify how to select the respondents or the firms or whatever cross sections. You also need a justification for the years or the periods or the waves of your panel data set. So you don't just wake up and say, I'm starting from here to this. You need to have some kind of reason behind that period as well, which you are looking at for analysis. So that's what I wanted you to highlight, and thank you very much for mentioning that and sharing your experience from your own work. I have no particular order here, really. Anybody else who wants to go with the same question, what you're working on or what you are thinking of working on, doesn't mean you must have done it already. We are all students here. Opolot. Which option or choice are you using or analyzing, and why?
Morning, Bernard and team.
Morning, Julius. How are you?
Fine, thank you. I'm using primary data.
Okay.
I'd moved somehow to analysis, but I was advised to go back because I'd only used primary. So I'm trying to see how to integrate some bit of qualitative data to be able to back up the primary, because in the area of HR, to be able to provide a better understanding of the area that I'm covering, it would be better if it is backed up.
Yes, Julius, if you don't mind, what is your dependent variable? I'm using that language where everyone is likely to pick.
I'm looking at aspects to do with the turnover, intentional career change.
Okay.
Yes. So,
and these cross sections, all the respondents, the cross section here is a respondent in this case.
Yes, I was targeting academic staff.
Okay.
Yes. So based on the first day discussion that we had at the beginning of this year, I really saw that we need to, as we go forward, we still track back to be able to build a good paper. That is what I'm trying to work on in order to have a good thesis, which is defendable.
I understand. Very good.
Yes.
So we are just checking on each other here, really, in terms of what we are doing or what we are planning to do. Some of us are just starting, but these are things we learn from each other. This is a Students' Congress, and we are all here for, just picking leaves here and there. John Asingire, I hope, are you with us?
Yes.
Yes, John, it's the same question. For where are you, where have you reached, or what are you planning to do?
Oh, thank you, Mr. Bernard and the team. I am actually new and I am an intending student for PhD.
Right.
I am just starting.
Okay. Have you thought about an area of research or topic or anything broadly?
Yes, I have thought about it, but then I have not yet brought it to the attention of my seniors to give me a guideline on how I will move on.
So which area is it? Is it engineering? Is it business or
It's hospitality. It's in hospitality.
Yes.
Yes. And basically I would wish to tackle the restaurant area.
Wonderful. Yes. Okay. At least that is you have perspective and the direction in terms of where you are shooting. Yes, we start from that forest, John. So keep it up and keep working around that. And these issues we are talking about here at one time, they are going to be part of your work as well.
Thank you.
Thank you for your response and sharing that. Any other person, members? I don't want to behave like a primary 2 school teacher, but this is free flow and sharing. We have our seniors here. Thomas Wawire. Thomas, are you with us?
Yes. Good morning, everybody. Yes.
Good morning.
Yes. I am at the beginning.
Okay.
Yes, I'm just trying to handle the topic.
But which area generally? Yes.
My area is I'm looking at finances and ability challenges.
Okay.
Of universities in Uganda. And that's my DV.
Okay.
So I'm around there.
Yes. So you see, as you are conceptualizing and coming down, add this question on your thoughts. Which data are you likely to use, and why? And therefore, which estimation approach am I going to use from my analysis? So that is very okay. We are just in that forest, digging around. Bosco Amerit. I know, my brother, I think for you are beyond the topic as for now. So please, the same question.
Yes, no, Bernard, good morning and good morning, team. I dived in a few minutes late a bit, but
yes,
going by the discussion, I imagine I could be able to give highlights.
Sure.
I'm tackling my methodologies on qualitative comparative analysis that is inclined to address the case study method data collection. I have close to 37 cases that I've been picking data from. So I'm doing the analysis and assessing the behavior of the data. And apparently, my dependent variable is commercialization. And
yes.
the area of the test area is the biofuels. So I think that might be the gist of the discussion. I'm not so sure if I've missed out something.
You haven't missed out exactly. That's what we are thinking in. Actually, we brought in a new dimension, qualitative data also has a whole host of approaches that you borrow for analysis. So Bosco, maybe one question on that. In that context, what kind of analysis are you borrowing or using for members to maybe also who are looking in that direction to think of?
Thank you, Ben. Addressing is qualitative analysis that borders integrating tools of quantitative analysis. It is a fairly developing method.
Okay.
It is named qualitative comparative analysis because it addresses within the case and between case studies. And in this case, we focus on 2 dimensions.
Yes.
We have the crisp set qualitative comparative analysis and the fuzzy set qualitative comparative analysis. The 2 vary in terms of assignment of values to the case members. The former, which is the crisp set, is the equivalent of the choice models that you hinted on in the discussion. It gives while the latter, the fuzzy set, is more of fuzzy logic. It addresses members, assigns members into sets based on their degrees of performance between the values 1 to 0, 0 to 1, and provides also a cutoff point, which is the midpoint, where if a case member falls in that midpoint, it becomes irrelevant. So based on that, we assign the set members values and eventually take the dimension of a quantitative analysis and picks most of the techniques in that regard. But generally, it seems it is integrative in a way. So when the cases are isolated, we get counterfactuals that speak to the uniqueness of the data. Those cases that otherwise would be called outliers in the correlational studies, regressional studies. That's what the case study model, the analysis picks to address the unique. What do those outliers speak as the new addition to the knowledge? I think, Ndugu Ben, if you permit, I could end it at that for now.
No, really, thank you very much, Bosco. You know, see, like I mentioned, what I talked about is not exhaustive, but importantly, for members who are starting, these are all thoughts, you know, to go through. Sometimes you have this topic where you reach methodology section and you ask yourself, so what am I going to do? And I think whoever raised this question has gave us a good stone to stand on and learn from each other. Thank you very much, Bosco. Qualitative approaches, all a whole school of approaches that you can also look through. Like Bosco mentioned, this commercialization. So again, it goes back to your dependent variable and how you are looking at it. We still have 10 minutes or so. Who wants to go? Petronila or Irene Ayo? Petronila, are you with us? Okay, maybe she's not on now, or she's can't
I'm
unmute.
on, please. I'm on.
Oh, okay.
Good morning once again.
Good morning.
Yeah, for me, I'm choosing, okay, the topic is the contribution of Cyperus papyrus to the local communities in peri-urban wetlands, Yes, so my independent variable would be wetland use patterns. So for me, I'm going in for the series, and possibly it would also have a little bit of cross-section. Now, I'm just giving a little background of one of the case studies, which is Chetinda wetland. That is what we call the Gaba wetland. Now, over time, this place has changed from what it used to be. Okay, I'm using a 30-year series or 30-year time. That is from 90 to 2020. That is the period of time I'm looking at. And
so
I'm
you're
looking
at annual series.
Yes, please.
Okay.
Now, the reason why I'm looking at that, I would just first give a little background about the Chetinda wetland. That this Chetinda wetland, the very, very first people who settled around here were the veterans, the war veterans who claimed they did not have where to go, and they found that as an open space for them to occupy. Now, over time, now this place has changed to the extent that it is beginning to affect the lake in one or the other. So mine would be right now is that, are they using it sustainably or not? Now, a little bit, I've collected some data within this place, and I'll tell you that when it comes to the harvest of the wetland resource, they have tried their best not to harvest. But again, the problem that they are having right now is that they are not using the place sustainably. So at the end of the day, it is impacting on them negatively in terms of health, because some of them are having the toilets, which are the toilets as well as the, the flying toilets. Yes, the toilets, the pit latrines, as well as flying toilets, which effect is still coming back to them as well as to us who are enjoying the water as well as the fish in the wetlands. So at least that would be just a sketchy bit of my work.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, our sister. You know, to my fellow students, you can see the diversity of this group, and this is where we pick ideas and also, you know, use them for our work. She's coming from ecology or ecological science now that we are looking at. So there is no standard direction that we are looking at here. That's why I really like hearing from all of us as much as I can, because it gives me that extended view of what each of us are working. We have engineering people here, we have natural sciences, we have business, we have, you know, across and financial experts. 5 minutes to go. Dennis Oula, do you want to close this on the same question? Where are you and what are you thinking of analyzing? And, you know, same question.
Bernard, I joined a little late. I didn't get the beginning of this. Sorry.
No worries. Okay. Who else? Who else wants to go? I don't want to.
Yes, Bernard.
Irene.
Good morning. You had called my name. Irene, are you?
Yes.
Morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Thank you for enabling our future. I also joined in a little bit late, but for me, I'm still the beginner. I haven't reached that part of data collection. And I'm looking at financial resilience of small and medium enterprises in Uganda. And I still did my concept paper, and I'm ready to submit it.
Okay.
That's
So
where I am. I'm still in the beginning,
Well,
but I'm grateful and appreciate this group, because it has helped me a lot to move.
Good. So lessons we are at different levels. That's why we, learn from each other. Is what you are thinking about. You can also try to see what Bosco or Petrolina are looking at, and and that's the most important part here that we try to mention. Samuel Anyolo.
Yes, good morning, everybody.
Good morning,
I am also
Samuel.
at the very beginning, and I'm trying to look at the impact of human resource management practices on the performance of local governments in Uganda.
Okay.
I foresee the area being very useful, especially when I come to that, I'm likely to look at the time series.
Right. Right. Okay. See, so that gives you a hint, and that's why we brought this question. It doesn't mean you need to get there before you think about it. This is actually the right time, Samuel, for you to start, thinking about it as you keep moving. And thank you very much. Finally, my brother, you've been here.
Bernard, before you leave that one, since he's looking at HR practices and performance, will we have time series for HR practices? Is it possible to get HR practices for the last 30 years or 20 years? And also the performance of local governments for the last 30 years? Is it possible? I'm just thinking aloud. Bernard, over to you.
Right. Thank you, Prof, for bringing that. I think this kind of ambushed Samuel. I'm sure in the next sessions he will give us more about his topic and issues. But yes, whatever is going to be constructing performance side, maybe data is there, but human resources practices, we don't know exactly what he's constructing under that, but that's a good question, Prof. Samuel, most importantly, you have to know that time series you're looking at, whatever variables will make up your analysis must have observed of about a minimum of 30 years, or minimum of 30 months, or minimum of 30 weeks, if you are looking at weeks, so that you go for time series analysis and estimations. But those are things we are going to read more about and also get from this group. All right, 1 minute. Dombin, I wanted to really ask you, say hello, and as we close this, you've been missing in action in a way for some weeks. Dombin, how are you?
Good morning.
Good morning,
I'm fine.
Amos.
What a pleasure to join you. Actually, I've been having some challenges here, but I'm very glad to resume.
Wonderful. Okay. Thank you very much. I just saw your name and I thought you are, yes, good to have you back.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, I think we have come to the almost end of this. I want to, members, those who have not spoken, we shall repeat this question to share experiences in another session. So, but most importantly, keep thinking as you are starting your topic, have some kind of rough idea as far as your methods are concerned, and therefore that includes choice of estimation analysis, or generally data analysis. How am I likely to analyze if you have not reached there? And for those who are already with data, time to explore what options do I have. Even within cross-sectional, there are so many dimensions. Even within time series, it's not a one-way approach of time series. There are so many estimations that you have to go for. So, you're thinking of panel data, then you need to also now scale down and say, then what am I likely to estimate? I think that's what we need to keep working around with. And I want to thank you again and our seniors who are here. I don't want to stretch this any further. Close our Students' Congress, not really close, but adjourn, I think, to the next time. I also want to take this chance then to hand over to Dr. Ahmed Walugembe for the next session. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Bernard Wabukala. I hope, Bernard, I'm clear. Can you confirm?
Yes, Dr. Walugembe, we can hear you.
Good. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Bernard. Thank you for pushing the Students' Congress. Allow me to communicate and say that we are really appreciative of the commitment of the students, especially in the Congress. From the time of their discussions to the time of sharing experiences. We appreciate your team, Joseph and Charles, yourself, and Bosco, among others who have been very, very vigilant in driving the Students' Congress. I think it's high time we need to really recruit some of people who are just starting to also give you support, people like Irene Ayo. Irene, thank you very much for being part of the sessions over time. Allow me at this moment also welcome you to the main session of discussion, where we learn a number of issues related to research and to academics, and also the general understanding of the concepts of research in our PhD level. I really appreciate our and senior Professor Kai for this initiative of ensuring that we have a platform that can really learn both for people who have reached the level of PhD and those who are just starting any and this you should be able to mute. And that is very important. I also want to appreciate the senior colleagues who wake up very early in the morning every Sunday to really give in their 2 hours or 3 hours or 4 hours and then listen in. That is kind of great. Dr. Dennis Msinguzi has been part of the platform since inception, and he has been part of those who have been pushing this platform. These people really are doing CSR. They are giving in their time and energy for free. Dr. Msinguzi, we appreciate you and we appreciate your commitment. Last year we had Dr. Gideon Nkurunziza for almost 2 months, taking us through a number of methodological aspects and data analysis. And those who learned. Those who missed out on it, hopefully we shall have some time and revisit. Dr. Goreti Shaime, thank you very much for your continued support of the platform. We appreciate you, and I think you have done a great job. And many other senior colleagues, Professor Joseph Ntai, Professor Rola Orobie, Professor Kagari, Professor Bajire, who has been able to present to us a number of times, a number of issues. We appreciate them. Today's discussion, still we're trying to finalize issues in the background. And today's discussion is in the area of trying to integrate philosophy into theory, especially at the background level. Integration of philosophy into theory, especially at the background level. These are issues that are kind of conceptual in nature. They require a little bit of understanding, and we really appreciate our team presenter on this issue, Dr. Denis Musinguzi, over time. Beyond this, we really appreciate him for really putting together his time and energy to add value to the students. So we also welcome our students from the different platforms or from the different universities. Students from the universities in Uganda. Welcome all of you, and this platform for all universities and from here. And those students from the East African community, the South African community, the North African community, the Asian, European American community, somehow attend the platform. Then we appreciate it. And sometimes even facilitators come from these different angles. So today's discussion, as earlier indicated, is going to be by Dr. Denis Musinguzi to integrate philosophy in theory. You know that Dr. Denis has been an expert on our side on issues of philosophy. And I know we should also appreciate that a PhD is about theory and philosophy, because it's a doctor of philosophy. So a PhD is about theory and philosophy. It is very, very important that at whatever type of PhD you're doing, you must understand the concept of philosophy and theory, because that's where you make a difference and a great distinction from all other areas of study at all levels. So we are dealing with something that is extremely pertinent. He has presented twice, but also the first time they had with Dr. Hassan Bashir. I had requested him to join, but I think he should be in transit. But given those different issues, my humble request would be that he would tell us the means of interaction, because he thought that today we should have more interaction from the students to see if they have grasped and understood something from the earlier discussions. At this moment, really allow me invite him to take us through what he prepared for us, and then he will tell us the mode of discussion we may use at the end of the day. We should appreciate him for that. Dr. Denis Musinguzi has been teaching, or he teaches in mainly among other universities from Uganda Matters University in Kozi. Dr. Denis, you are welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Ahmad Walugembe, for welcoming me to take up the platform. I want to first recognize and thank in a particular way, the student session that begins at 3. Yeah, today I woke up a little earlier, and I think about 5 or 10 minutes I logged in, and I found when Bernard Wakala was introducing the session, quite interesting. And from the session, I'm learning that we have students who have progressed. We have PhD students who are at the beginning. And more excitingly, we also have intending students or prospective students. And that shows how popular, this platform has become, that even some people who have not yet started the journey of PhD doing, sometimes I call it PhD doing journey, have also learned about this platform and they log in, to ensure that they pick an idea or two. And for me, this is important because as I'm making my presentation, as I'm sharing my thoughts and my views, yes, I need to bear in mind that we have a diversity of students at different levels, grappling with different, parts of their study. I'll try as much as possible to make sure that my presentation, is relevant to all of these categories within a background. Yes, Dr. Walugende, you are saying the mode. I'm going to make a presentation as usual. It is going to be maybe slightly brief presentation. I'm saying brief because I'm looking at 2 hours from 4 a.m. up to around 6. So if I can take about an hour or maybe some few minutes, more than an hour, whatever it is, so that then we can have some time. Yes, but I agree with you. When I give this kind of presentation, sometimes, yes, it's okay to ask questions from the side of students, but sometimes it is important, to listen, to hear the experiences of students in grappling with the philosophy. To me, that would add more value. So linking, philosophy or theory or whatever it is to the level at which we are as students, and then in particular, reflecting on our own experiences and our own challenges, how far we are getting into it, where are we getting a breakthrough, where are we getting lost. If it is contextualized like that, for me, I think it becomes more useful. As Dr. Walugembe mentioned at the beginning, philosophy and theory are largely conceptual, they are largely theoretical as they are being presented. But they are so important that they lie at the heart of the study, especially PhD studies and other scientific research, that if we do not get these things clear from the beginning, then we experience different challenges, at different levels. And that's why for the last 3 weeks, we have been putting emphasis on the background, because that's where, you are able to express your ideas about what your research is about, the different aspects of your research, and the other aspects of the background, as we mentioned, from the beginning. The good thing we said, the background is not something that we just write at the beginning, and by the end of the proposal, we think we are done with it. The background is something that we revisit even after analyzing and presenting data. That is something that we've explained before. So it is important that for the beginners, some of the things and issues we talk about may not be clear right from the beginning, but at least the key aspects of your study should be clear. But the background is a back and forth, something that you continue doing at different levels. Let me see if I can share the things I'm going to talk about today. Yeah, participants can now see my application. That's what the computer is telling me. Yes, to the new and prospective students, I'm Dennis Musinguzi, as Dr. Walugembe has introduced me. I do my intellectual work at Uganda Martyrs University, and I've also interacted with different platforms and different universities with regard to this issue that we call philosophy. From my teaching background, you know, when you're introducing a class, it's important that you link it with the previous class and previous classes so that we are able, you know, to have the continuity. And I'm doing this in particular. Yeah, Bernard, yes, my presentation is in the time series. I don't know whether I'm right to call it that, because we started with the aspects of the background. Then in the first week, in the second week, where we called we went into integrating you know, philosophy in the background, and now in the third week we are talking about integrating theory in the background, the philosophy and theory in the background. So we are kind of making a progression. So to a student who is tuning in only today, may get a little bit lost if they do not understand, you know, where we are coming from. And as Dr. Walugembe has mentioned, ours is a PhD, and it is Doctor of Philosophy. Whether you are in economics, whether you are in human resource, whether you are in statistics, you are becoming a doctor of philosophy. And you must therefore learn how to introduce, you know, philosophy in statistics, philosophy in human resource management, philosophy in accounting and auditing, and whatever it is, whether it is procurement, whichever your field is, you should be able, you know, to borrow from the tools and resources of philosophy so that you are able to understand your particular trait in a more detailed and convincing way. And because of that, we said, yes, it is important that we integrate philosophy right from the background. We know in terms of structure, in terms of itinerary from the university, it is in the methodology where we have that noise in the background. Yes, we are saying according to our research, you know, guidelines, it is in the methodology where we see a section on philosophy. And many students, yes, I'm now speaking to my prospective students and those who are still at the very beginning. Some students wait until they go to methodology to think about their philosophy. And by the time they go to methodology, either they have tried to use the philosophy without knowing, or they have abandoned it completely, and now they don't know even which philosophy, you know, explains their work, because we are waiting to introduce a dose of philosophy in the background in line with the expectations. No, that is not the way we do things at the PhD level. At the PhD level, we are supposed to know that we have, you know, some research traditions, some research paradigms, some bits of philosophies, and they reflect, you know, in the nature of the problem and the way we do the hypothesis or the research questions and the choice. So the more we integrate it from the beginning, you know, the better and the clearer the study becomes. So, and we agreed last week that in the background, philosophy can be reflected both explicitly or implicitly. Implicitly, because it is the heart and soul of your research. The way you write, the way you make arguments, the way you attain clarity, the way you link, you know, different aspects of your study, that is already philosophy. And many of us are philosophers, even without knowing. The challenge is that when we talk about philosophy, you know, people tend to get frowned. Yeah, it is difficult, it is theoretical, it's neither here nor there. I talked about prejudices on philosophy last week. But we agreed philosophy is about clarity. Philosophy is about direction. Philosophy is about depth. So some many people are actually philosophical without their knowing. And philosophy can be learned, by the way, even from other fields of the study that we are doing, as long as it is clarity, it is systematicity, it is logical coherence, you know, that's what we talk about. So sometimes it is just implicit, but sometimes we make it even explicit. And right from the background, whether you are talking about the contextual background, and you say, well, my context is this, and my analysis of the issues is even rooted in this kind of philosophy, and I'm using it because it is going to help me, you know, this, do this and this and this. You can do that even right from the background, but you have to be, you know, a little cautious so that you are not too repetitive and you are not too, yeah, you may divert the attention of the reader and get them and make them get lost in the philosophy. And we said it is important, even in determining, as I've already said, whether it is the study problem or the study opportunity, whether you are formulating your objectives or hypotheses, it is important, you know, that these are rooted in a particular, you know, kind of philosophy that is going to guide the study from the beginning up to the end. And I've already mentioned about that. We say philosophy is important because, okay, let me see if I can. Yeah, let me see if I can make my slide slightly bigger so that those who are following by phone and small computers can, can be able to follow. Yes, we agreed that philosophy strengthens the argumentation and the sequencing of arguments. It also allows the systematicity. That is for the students who are joining us today. So we are carrying on the conversation. I call it a conversation because I am largely sharing my views, of course, picked from you know, some few scholars here and there. We are engaging in a conversation. So we are now building on what we did in the first week and the second week about the components of the study background and integrating philosophy. Now we want to also reflect on the integration of theory. Ideally, it is at the background, but in reality, what is in the background runs through, you know, the entire study. Now, what we need to know is that in the theoretical background, theory is itself reflected in the background. Yeah, it's one of the aspects. And because it's one of the aspects, then it is important that we make link between philosophy and the theory, so that there is a level of continuity, there is a level of coherence. Otherwise, if you have a philosophy that conflicts with the theory, then you're going to have a problem. You're going to have issues, you know, in analyzing whether it is variables or concepts or empirical findings. It becomes a little bit, you know, difficult. And we keep in mind that both philosophy and theory, of course, are influenced by the nature of the problem. I'm highlighting the nature of the problem because when we talk about philosophy, we talk about theory, and we give it prominence that may not necessarily be due. Every research begins with a research problem, and the problem is the master in this case. So once you've understood the nature of your problem, then you can easily, you know, link it with the philosophy and the theory and the other aspects of your research. So my dear new and prospective students, yes, you will be hearing concepts of ontology, concepts of epistemology. Ontology is about reality, it's about being, it's about the existence that you are addressing at that particular level. So some problems will manifest as quantitative, some problems will manifest as qualitative. Yeah, there is a prospective student who has started doing his work, and he talked about the impact of the human resource practices on the performance of local governments. Even the including of the word impact alone scholars will tell you impact is assessed quantitatively. Yes, of course, there are also qualitative elements of it. So you will either go quantitative or you'll go do mixed method and bring in some qualitative elements, but it's extremely difficult for you to study impact only qualitatively. I mean, so you immediately, when you're talking about your problem, then you already, begin to imply, the kind of philosophy and the kind of approach that you are going to take. Then he said, okay, I'm going to use the time series. And we're asking, someone asked, professor asked him, okay, will you be able to establish, time series of human resource practices in the last 30 years, in the last, 31, even the practices. So we do not choose these things at leisure. We choose them because our problem dictates that, and then we have a consistent, philosophical orientation that is going to guide us, and we are able to move in the right direction. So the role of theory and the role of theorization is very key in research. Why? Because in explaining a problem, in creating the scope of the study, we are having a certain knowledge basis in which we call epistemology, the knowledge basis that is guiding us in making some of these decisions and how we frame and address the study assumptions that are informing our research. And because of that, we are looking at the research philosophy, which is informing the theory, and the two are integrated. So the moment we are going to include philosophy and theory in our background, then it is important that even in theorization, we also make some links with philosophy when we are writing, especially a theoretical background. The choice of the theories that we are including in our study must be consistent with the philosophy of the research that is guiding our study. So for today's content, in order now to make sense of all that, I'm doing the same things, but slightly differently. And, create step by step. Yes, we have some interference, Mr. Admin, help us. Yeah, in teaching, we talk about the stimulus, which stimulates learning, the object, and then the competitive stimulus. So that noise is a competitive stimulus, and it diverts our attention. I'm glad that it has been addressed. So we want to know, before you talk about integrating the theory in the background, these are just brief thoughts. It's not a detailed, presentation about theories, about scholars, about what. No, I'm just sharing ideas to frame our understanding of theory in philosophy and in the background of the study. So we need to know, when we talk about a theory, what is it? And why do we need even a theory? And then I'm making an argument that the choice of philosophy, that the choice of theory is rooted into the research traditions and the research paradigms. I mean, this is philosophy, not difficult, basic, elementary, philosophy. Put us understanding, and we begin moving together, thinking together, reflecting together, and bringing these things in our studies. Yes, and I'm doing this because yes, we have students who have registered for PhDs and they are meeting philosophy for the first time. So when we go to the traditions and talk briefly about paradigms, then how we move from the traditions to the paradigms, and then how the paradigms are going to influence, the philosophical framework, the theoretical frameworks, and then help us integrate theory in the background, and by extension, the entire study is what we are, reflecting about today, without going into, deeper kind of philosophical study. So I have a book, and it is called Social Research, Theory, Methods, and Techniques. And this is where I got this definition of a theory. a set of organically connected propositions. When we talk about studies, we talk about assumptions. You can also call it propositions. Your research is proposing to advance knowledge in a particular field and addressing particular elements of that aspect of the field that your research is addressing. So before we talk about philosophy, before we talk about theory, then it is important to know what are the key assumptions that are informing my study. What are the kind of propositions that my study is putting across? If it is human resource practices, maybe the scholar is saying, look here, human resource practices have varied and changed at different times, bringing the time series. And these have impacted, in different ways on the performance of different entities. You are making propositions for your study, and it has to be, as clear as that. So what are the key assumptions? What are the key propositions? So when we are talking about a theory broadly, it is just, and these are organically connected, organic. You do not force variables. You do not force concepts. They should naturally coexist. They should naturally cohere. Because we also talk about the conceptual frameworks, conceptual clarity, which links with the theories, the way we deploy concepts, and the kinds of meanings that are ascribed to the different elements of our research is important. So these organically connected propositions are located at a higher level of observation and generalization than even empirical reality. The study is going to, you are going to make an empirical study, make research, either set questionnaires, conduct interviews, conduct what, but these theoretical parameters are higher, at a higher level. In other words, they create the framework, and that's why we call it a theoretical framework. They create a framework that is going to inform and guide the empirical study, the empirical reality, and how you analyze it. So a theory is that above, because it is a guide, it is a mirror. If you put on glasses, if it is red, reality outside will appear red. When you put on glasses that are blue, reality out there will appear blue. And look at the theoretical framework as, the piece of glasses that you put on your eyes. If it is dark, the reality out there, looks dark. If it is red, everything you are looking at looks red. Why? Because you are imposing a framework on the reality outside there. And it is at that higher level, meaning that the empirical reality is going to conform to the theoretical frames that you have chosen to adapt. It is that direct. It is that, it is that, direction. The kind of the framework that you are going to use, it is going to reflect on your reality. Now, the moment reality conflicts with the theoretical framework, then it is going to be very difficult. You will be finding obstacles at every stage. You will begin, forcing things to coexist when they are actually not even coexisting. Some people will even go to the level of doctoring their findings and deliberately changing so as to conform. In philosophy, we are liberated. You create the right frames for the right reality, and it becomes a template. Everything you just fill in. So when the philosophy is clear, when the theory is clear, right from the background, and the philosophy and the theories are consistent with the problem, and they are consistent even with your study objectives or hypotheses or whatever approaches you are using, then when you come to literature review, to the deeper analysis of the theory, to the discussion of the empirical findings, as I've said, it becomes a template. When philosophy is not clear, when theories are not clear, when these are not linking together, So when we talk about introducing them in the background, whether it is at the beginning or up to the end, then it means that in the background, you are already explaining the context of your problem. You are giving the evidence of your problem. You are thinking of a philosophy, I mean, you are reflecting the philosophical perspective that is addressing it, and also the theoretical parameters that are informing and guiding the study. So when you bring in the theoretical parameters, then you are setting, as I've said, a form of a template. The rest becomes, a fill-in, because you've already created the direction, you've already created a line and a process of thinking that you will follow through, from the beginning to the end. And that's why we say that these connected propositions, which at a higher level are derived from the empirical patterns of the reality that you are dealing with. Empirical patterns of reality. So I've forgotten his name. When he talks about human resource practices, there must be an empirical pattern within the practices. And if it is, 30 years ago or even more, they say the quantitative. Again, I will talk about this later. Patterns. When we talk about empirical patterns of the practices, it could be, okay, in this period, things were like this and this. In a period that followed, because of advance of technology, the patterns kind of shifted from this to this. With the advent of COVID, even the patterns changed radically, even all the more. So it means you are relating with the very reality that is at the heart of your study. And from this, the frameworks which create the parameters of analysis, then you are able to analyze and even forecast, and even, analyze the findings, draw conclusions, and make recommendations. That is a theory. It provides parameters for analyzing our research. And yes, they are adding, it is an organized body of interrelated constructs and propositions. We started with propositions, and these are enabling us to understand, to predict, to control the phenomena that we are dealing with in our research. So the theory as philosophy are that important. And that was the point of Dr. Ahmad. When the philosophy is not clear, when the theoretical parameters are not clear, yes, you will begin imposing frames, you will begin shifting in meaning, you'll keep shifting in direction and focus. And then the supervisor will be saying, okay, in point A, you are mentioning this, but in point B, you are diverting and talking about things that are not in point A. And when you go to point 3, you kind of bring one element in point A, but you leave out the other 2 elements, and the study is zigzag. It's not connected. But when the philosophy is clear, when the theoretical perspectives are clear, it's already presented in the background, then, even research becomes enjoyable. It becomes sweet. And this is what I tell students. Research can be very lonely, can be very problematic, can even be stressful. But that happens if you don't know what to do and how to do it. And conversely, research should be exciting. Research should be illuminating. Every step you take, you feel excited and you feel happy. I'm making progress. And that is the level of the psyche that we need from the PhD scholars. PhD doing can be a long and difficult journey, especially when you do not get support of either the supervisors or the PhD panels and yeah. But research should be something exciting, should be something that you look forward to. Yes, like we wake out of sleep for this session. When you are doing research, you should have that excitement that even when a point comes in your subconscious, you can wake up and process it. And yeah, we say if you are doing your PhD, please feel free to wake up at any moment. When you process the idea in the mind, reach to your light by the bedside, bring your computer, write that idea and sleep, so that research becomes exciting. And we are saying it is going to be more exciting if you have clear understanding of your problem, you have the clear philosophy that informs your problem, and then the theoretical perspective. And these are the things that we shall even integrate in the background, so that by the time someone goes through the background to the study, has already known what the problem is about, the context, has looked at the evidence that is available, the kind of philosophical and theoretical frameworks that are guiding it, the kind of assumptions that you are putting, and the kind of findings and recommendations that you are gearing to. We talked about this in the first session. We said ideally everything in your study should be reflected in the background, and that's why we call it a background. It gives you the opportunity to showcase your study. It gives you opportunity to sell your study, and it should be written in that interesting and captivating language. So we are adding on just one slide to try to understand a little more about the theory. So you can call it a principle or a body of principles. And as we've said earlier, these ones are giving you parameters. These principles are giving you parameters to explain your reality, to explain a given phenomenon. Every study is rooted in a particular reality, the ontology. So you must know the ontological manifestations of your study. You must understand the nature of the phenomenon that you are addressing. Some phenomenon is quantitative, others is qualitative. Others has both elements of qualitative and quantitative. You do not simply say, for me, I'm good at statistics, therefore my study is going to be quantitative. You may have a study problem that is largely qualitative and it is difficult to quantify. So it is important. It's the principles that are going to help you explain that. As I've already said, it's an analytical frame. It informs and guides the study. And because of this, when you reflect it in the background, it even creates, the direction that you are taking as a scholar. And at a more philosophical level or in a more philosophical concept, we are talking about models. Yeah. And it's a model that is going to help you predict. You're going to undertake the study. You're going to make observations. You are going to generate data and you are going to test it and verify it and make observations. So a theoretical framework gives you that perspective that is going to guide you at all these stages of your research. And when we are doing theoretical analysis, it's not only critiquing to find the gaps, but it is also situating how these gaps will be addressed at different levels of our study and the kinds of observations and conclusions we are going to draw out of this. So in writing the theoretical framework, yes, we have to know what is the theory, in which conditions did the theory arise, what are the key assumptions of the theory, what are the gaps within the theory, how is my study going to come in, and how are these theoretical parameters going to guide my study, along the way. So it is a carefully thought out explanation. It's an explanation for observations of the natural world. Your research is dealing with the natural world, and you are constructing this using a scientific method. The scientific method can be quantitative, it can be qualitative, it can be mixed, kind of approach. And Silverman 2000 tells us why we need a theory and why a theory is important. And he's saying any scientific finding, so the findings of your research, and he's even using singular, any scientific finding, it can be an element of what you're studying, is usually to be assessed in relation to the theoretical perspective. So we are assessing these findings alongside the frameworks that you put. If you put a framework that is red and you're finding green and the blue findings, yes, in research we say those are also findings, but you will say, okay, I had framed my study to see the red findings, the empirical reality on the ground has returned green and blue findings, then analyze that and draw the implication for that. Yeah. And do not force the blue and green findings to be red because red was your theoretical framework. If you framed it well and it has returned green findings, then you make observations in that direction. And that's why we talk about verification and falsification of our evidence. So the evidence can be verified. Those of you who use quantitative researches, I'm not so much grounded in quantitative, but I use it here, the working hypothesis and the null hypothesis. One is verified, the other one is falsified. In philosophy of science, we have scholars who are saying that for reality to be taken as objective and as meaningful, then it should be verifiable. And we talk about verifiability. Others are saying, no, sometimes reality is very difficult to verify. So we already have the assumptions on reality, then we can do falsification. And anything that cannot be falsified, then we hold it as if it is true. So again, it is verifiability or falsifiability. That is at the level of philosophy. And that is the philosophy that is going to guide your hypothesis, whether you are verifying or nullifying. It is the same. I mean, it is the same. You might be saying, okay, now philosophy, now what? You are using hypotheses to verify or falsify your own assumptions. And at the level of philosophy, yes, as I've said, we have scholars who are in the verifiability approach, but along the way, others saying, no, sometimes reality cannot be easily verifiable. Karl Popper's, the reality, as long as we can falsify it, if we cannot falsify it, then we hold it. And this isn't surprising, whether it is social reality, even if it is natural reality. When the time I studied the chemistry and physics in O level, the chemical elements in a set were about 36 chemical elements. People who are studying science today, the elements have gone more than 100. And then someone will be asking, okay, is even natural knowledge also subject, to these differences and changes? Yes, it also happens. And that's why even people in the natural sciences, sometimes they disagree on how they interpret their own reality. And that's why methodology, philosophy, and theory becomes very important. And if we are going to understand now the philosophy and the theory and how these things are coming in, I'm introducing just briefly. Yes, we have research traditions and we have research paradigms where we move from the traditions to paradigms, and then what they mean and how they relate with theoretical frameworks. So when we talk about research paradigm, and this is, okay, let me now speak to the beginners. You are talking about quantitative, you're talking about qualitative, you will hear paradigms which are positivist, you will hear about paradigms which are interpretive, and then you begin scratching your head and say, why the hell am I even doing this PhD? People are confused. They are telling us positivism. What does positivism to do with my research on accounts in an organization? At the level of prejudice, we shall ask those questions. What has positivism to do with how accountants do their work? How auditors do their work? When you take a deep breath and you say, okay, my heart relax, let me listen to how these traditions and paradigms have come up, then you say, oh, okay. At first I thought these things were not related, but eventually you need paradigms even to understand the accounting and auditing processes. And these paradigms are based on certain traditions of research. Remember, PhD doing is about knowledge generation. It's about knowledge productivity. Research, and in particular scientific research, aims at producing some knowledge productivity. Now, when you go back to the evolution of the philosophical approaches in research, you realize that scientific research has been broadly informed by two tendencies. We have the tendency which says knowledge exists out there. Knowledge exists out there. And your role as a researcher is to use a scientific method to go and discover this knowledge the way it is, not the way you analyze it to be. And as we shall see, this now informed the positivist kind of orientation. I think that will be my next slide. We have another tradition which says, no, even if knowledge is out there, you may not just discover it. You produce it. And how you produce it, you give it direction. If you are producing cakes, you determine how much salt and how much sugar and which ingredients that you're putting. When you're making a cake for your children, I mean, you put all the ingredients. When you are making a cake for the market, you say, you know, the people I'm targeting, they do not have a lot of money and the products, the prices have increased. I need to reduce on some of the ingredients that I'm using so that I can be able to have, you know, profitability. So there you are producing knowledge in the way you want it, depending on the objective conditions and the realities that you're facing. You know the ingredients of proper cake, but you realize you will not make any profit out of it. So it's not about knowing what a cake is and how best to do it. Sometimes the objective conditions and realities may influence the way you look at this cake. So some scholars insist a cake is a cake, whether it is for the market, whether it is for your children. And that came with the standardization of Industrial Revolution. Standardization. When you go to town, you realize that some food joints, whether it is Cafe Javas or what, have dominated the market because there is a level of predictability in terms of quality, in terms of customer care. And we do not take these things for granted. They came as a result of deep scientific business research. So there's some who will say, no, knowledge of a burger, knowledge of a pizza, it is that standard. And your role is to know the ingredients and do it in the right way. But when you are eating, you say, no, I like the pizza of the other place and not the pizza of this place. Maybe because the ingredients have changed a bit, because someone is concerned about the fleeting market. So there are those who say knowledge is out there, your role as a researcher is to discover it. Others are saying, no, we construct knowledge depending on what we want, depending on what we seek to discover, depending on, and these perspectives are going to influence theorization. And that's why I'm bringing them. They are going to influence the way you theorize your research. Why? Because in scientific research, we are talking about science as a body of knowledge. The knowledge of a pizza, the knowledge of a cake. And we are looking at this knowledge as a product. That's why I'm talking about pizza. Even research, when you generate findings, these are your research product. If I go through your research product, what kind of ingredients does it have? Is it a research whose findings are testy, whose findings are captivating, whose findings, you know, are sweet to read and read and read? You know, some people have said, I've read this book 5 times. Why is someone reading the book 5 times? Because the findings, the content in that book is sweet. Reading it for the first time is not enough. You read it for the second time, you want to read it for the third time. Why? Because you have produced the quality that is attractive to the eyes and the souls of the readers. But the way you do that, it is a process. The way you come to that product. So the scientific research is the process that is going to produce a research product that is sweet to the reader. And in doing this, we are guided by certain paradigms of research. So those who say knowledge is discoverable, they belong to the positivist tradition. And they are oriented towards the quantitative approach. What does positivism mean? It is from Latin positum, to place there. You know, when you posit something, it means you put it there. So in other words, positivism is saying knowledge exists out there. So when you are going to theorize within quantitative parameters, then it is important that you are understanding this philosophy. And we call positivism the dominant science. Bernard Wabukala, I was listening to the first session, it was a group of quantitative scholars. I didn't hear anything qualitative, because the things you are talking about, the theory, the conceptual framework, and the most important is the dependent variable. Yes, that is the language of positivists. By the way, qualitative researchers sometimes are not even interested with variables. They are dealing with concepts. And sometimes as supervisors, you insist, get a conceptual framework and indicate the independent variable and the dependent variable. Qualitative research defies the variable language. You can just create a conceptual map on how your concepts are going to relate and inform each other without necessarily using the logic and the philosophy of. But yes, I was listening to a group of quantitative scholars. Now, if there is a qualitative scholar within the first session, he got about 10% of what the session was about. A quantitative scholar got about 80 or 90%, because it was basically that. Even when you are explaining the time series and you are saying it should be a minimum of 30 years, that is a quantitative language. A qualitative scholar may want to know how this has happened in the last 2-3 years. You get it. The moment you say it should be a minimum of 30, either 30 years or 30 months, you are using a positivist perspective, a positivist lens. To a constructivist, that may not be his or their problem, but depending on the nature of the problem that they are dealing with. Now, if you've not done philosophy, you will not be able to make that kind of distinction. And you will be saying, yes, I am a qualitative scholar, but you are using statistics, all this. So we are saying knowledge as discoverable belongs to the positivists, to the quantitative oriented scholars who want to go and quantify even this knowledge that exists out there using quantitative approaches, whether it is a regression or chi-square, whatever it is, you want to use that. But there are others who are saying, no, knowledge is produced and knowledge is interpreted. And the way it is interpreted may not necessarily be quantitative interpretation. It has other forms of interpretation. And these are oriented into the interpretivist approach or interpretivist paradigm. Now, when you are reading philosophy or going through this philosophy texts, you will hear about scholars, who are talking about positivism and interpretivism. You will hear others talking about positivism, post-positivism, and critical theory, and all these kinds of elements. And then you will be wondering, what do these words mean? So the two traditions actually produced the first two paradigms, the positivist paradigm and the interpretivist paradigm. It's only the subsequent scholars who are saying, no, in between or beyond this, we also have other paradigms. But I don't want to go into the teaching of the paradigms. What I'm only saying is that after these two initial paradigms, a third paradigm was born, which mixes the two approaches. And that came with critical realism. The scholars call the pure positivism as naive, positivism, because it assumes that reality exists out there, it exists in a perfect way, and the researcher can go out there and discover it. People are saying, no, reality is complex. It does not manifest in that kind of simplicity. And they call that naive positivism. So the critical realists are saying, no, sometimes the reality defies some of these categorizations because it is a bit complex. So if you belong to the tradition of it exists in a perfect way, you need a theoretical framework that is going to assess that kind of perfection. If you belong to the critical realistic perspective, which is about post-positivism, or as others call it, pragmatism. Yeah, the critical theory, the critical realism. For it is saying no, reality defies that kind of simplicity, and we therefore need both quantitative and qualitative approaches. So if you belong to the critical realism kind of perspective, or the interpretivist kind of perspective, then you realize you are going to use a different set of framework that is going to help you guide your study in the way it is. So then you are going to mix the approaches. When you mix the approaches, you have the mixed method approach. And this falls under either critical realism or post-positivism or pragmatism. Yeah, the mixed method approach. So we are saying we have the quantitative approach, we have the qualitative approach, we have the mixed method kind of approach, informed by different philosophies. But these are emerging from the research traditions. The tradition of positivism, the tradition of interpretivism, the tradition that mixes the two. And we are saying, if you are going to integrate your theory must be consistent with the philosophy. If you are using a positivistic kind of outlook, then you need a theoretical framework that is going to help you make that quantitative kind of sense. And that's why we are saying that paradigms are important, but sometimes they are not clear. Sometimes they're inflated with different and multiple meanings. Some scholars will actually treat paradigms as theories or subdivisions of a theory, meaning that paradigms speak directly to the theories. And others call paradigms a system of ideas. I got this from one of those books. I did put the reference. Others are calling it a school of thought. I think I got it from the other social research book. So paradigms sometimes have confused and multiple meanings. So here you can see that actually a paradigm can sometimes even be used as a theoretical framework. Or at least there should be clear link between your paradigm and your kind of theoretical framework. We are talking about integrating philosophy and theory in the background and in the entire study. And we are now speaking, the soft philosophical language, not the difficulty of the philosophy of science. So the system of ideas, the internal coherency, the systematicity that I was talking about. And it could be a school of thought that different scholars have come together and put, and it has been accepted within the scientific community. So research philosophy is a method, and when you apply it, it allows you as a researcher to generate ideas into knowledge and in the context of research. So we are generating knowledge. When we link the knowledge generation within the philosophy, within the theoretical framework, and we are integrating this in the background, we are integrating this in the methodology, we are reflecting them in the findings, we are reflecting them in the conclusions and recommendations, then the research becomes very powerful and it becomes consistent. Why do we need paradigms in the context of theory? Without a paradigm, the science of research will lack an orientation. You will lack the criteria of choice. If you do not have a philosophy, you don't know even the kind of approach, whether it is quantitative or qualitative. You don't know the kind of sampling that you are going to use if you do not have a clear paradigm of the philosophical orientation of your study. And it is that important. The clearer it is, the better. Because if you do not have it, every problem, every method, every technique become equally legitimate. And this is not always the case in reality. If you have a clear paradigm, a clear theoretical perspective, then it is going to guide. Of course, I've said this is based on problem, and in stating your problem, you will have clear parameters of the problem, not every aspect of the problem. If you do not have a clear parameter, yes, we are talking about human resource practices, we are talking about organizational performance, everything about human resource, everything about performance will be part of the problem. And your research cannot address everything about human resource. The moment you have a clear paradigm, then you also determine what aspects of human resource practice am I looking at. So by contrast, a paradigm constitutes a guide, just like a theoretical framework, meaning that theories and paradigms are actually essentially two sides of the same reality. Even when they are different, they should mutually coexist and logically feed into each other. Why? Because they are providing you, the scientist, the researcher, with a map and some sort of direction, a compass. And you are able even to interpret your map and be guided by your map. And if it is integrated right from the beginning, whether it is at the end or at the beginning, then it becomes, clearer. And Kuhn, one of the most powerful scholars in this area, yes, is saying in learning a paradigm, the scientist acquires theory, acquires methods and standards, usually in an inextricable mixture. I think Kuhn now summarizes everything that I'm talking about. In learning a paradigm, in utilizing a paradigm, in getting a paradigmatic kind of framework, then you are able to even get a theory. That's why I'm linking paradigms with theories. Some people present paradigms as theoretical frames. Others are saying paradigms are helping us to get a theoretical frame. And you are even able to get a method. So why am I saying this? You do not wait until chapter 3 for you to determine a philosophy and a method. The philosophy and the method goes back to the problem. It goes back to your research questions. It goes back to your hypothesis. And it is even guiding the methods that you are going to use. If you are a qualitative scholar, then you use the qualitative paradigms and methods and philosophies. And then you are able to keep your standards either as quantitative or as qualitative. But sometimes this will manifest, usually, not sometimes, it says usually, in an inextricable mixture. Inextricable. In other words, you may not even separate all. But in writing, you need to know, yes, am I using a paradigm as the theoretical framework, or I'm using a paradigm to inform the theory? And then how is that linked with the kind of methods that I'm going to use? It's only when this is clear that then you will be able to integrate these things in your background. If these things are not clear, then you will have nothing to integrate. We are talking about integrating philosophy and theory. If the philosophy is not clear, if the theory is not clear, then you have nothing to integrate. And that's why I start by explaining what these things are, so that when we are integrating, we know what we are integrating and at which level. So again, I'm bringing back home, who is telling us of a paradigm as a theoretical perspective. I told you paradigms and theories are inextricably linked. And he says this is accepted by the community of scientists, or the community of scholars in that given discipline. In other words, whichever discipline that you choose, within that discipline, there is a community of scholars, there is a community of practitioners who have generated some theories, and which theories have been accepted within that. If it is governance, we have the governing theories. If it is resource management, we have theories in that. If it is auditing and accountability, we have theories in that, in that field. So these have been accepted by a community of scholars, by a community of scientists, and it is founded on previous acquisitions within that field. So the theoretical frames that we use should be consistent, and they have been previously tested and applied, and we are testing and applying them in different contexts. And why do we need them? Because they guide you as a researcher through the specification and choice of what study. That is the problem. This is what I've been saying from the beginning. It's the paradigm that is going to help you specify and make a choice of what about your problem you're going to study. When we are generating topics, some people go to the libraries and read topics and they reframe them without even knowing the reality. And when they begin studying, they get lost. We say the research begins with the problem. So if it begins with the problem, then you must understand what the problem it is. And different scholars will tell us what are the ingredients of a good problem. Just like I talked about the ingredients of a cake, of a good meal, even the research, I mean, the problem has ingredients. So, and if you have the philosophy, then you are able to determine which are these ingredients of my research problem. And how am I dealing with them? Are they quantitative in nature or they are qualitative in nature? If they are quantitative, then I need a hypothesis to verify or falsify them. And I have seen some universities where they are forcing students to have both research problems and hypotheses. All master students present your research and they should include the following. And sometimes I say, okay, do we even know why we are forcing students to do this? Does it make sense to us? Say you're going to defend your proposal, please include brief background, problem statement, research questions, hypotheses, this and this. But these are defined traditions. There's some traditions that will permit questions. There's some traditions that will permit hypotheses. And when you have both hypotheses and questions, then it implies you are using a mixed method, where you have some research questions that you can answer qualitatively and hypotheses that you need to verify quantitatively. But someone is saying, I'm going to use qualitative research, and they are running hypotheses. And then you're asking them, why do you need these hypotheses? How are you going to verify them using a qualitative philosophical paradigm? And they say, no, that's what the lecturer told me to do. Please, lecturers, do not confuse students. And then I think that's why, these kinds of sessions, are kind of important. So you specify, the choice of your study. You formulate the hypothesis to explain the phenomena, or you ask questions. Then the identification of the most suitable empirical kind of research technique that one is going to use. But as I've said, and I think I'm almost finishing, yes, there is a contestation between the different models or approaches of research. There are those who do theory before empirical research. There are those who do theory at the end of the empirical research, especially those who use the grounded approaches. So, meaning if it is a theory before research, we are talking about a loop where we are looking at the theory, then we are looking at the data collection and data analysis and returning to the theory. So it means if you are using this, you should be clear with the theoretical perspective right from the beginning. You say, this is my problem, this is the appropriate theory that I'm going to use. And these are the theoretical assumptions, and you reflect them in your background. Then you determine the methodology, you do the data analysis. Why do we say you return to the theory? Because even theory should be integrated in the findings. And the findings may agree with the theory, they may contradict the theory, they may advance, that kind of element. Others are saying no. Other researches are spiral, where a theory and research are interlinked in an endless process. But in the theory after research, it is coming almost towards the end. So the researcher's work is not only about testing theories, but it is also about producing theories. So if you are doing the theory testing and theory application, which is a deductive, kind of approach, then it means you have a theory from the beginning. If you want to produce a theory at the end and you're using grounded approaches, which are usually in qualitative researches, you may not even worry about the theory at the beginning. You only get theory towards the end, meaning you are going to integrate the theory only after you have generated the theory that you are generating. Then you can reflect it in the background. So why am I bringing this? You may struggle to reflect theory in the background when you are not yet even clear about your study. In research, we say first things first. First have the clear problem, first have the clear whether it is quantitative or qualitative, then have the clear methodology, then you can always come back and strengthen, the background. And I'm saying Whether it is theory testing or theory producing, we are talking about deductive and inductive kind of approach, where one is you are testing the theories, and that is arguments that are based on theory and supported by empirical evidence. But if it is induction, it means that you are generating a theory and you start with the research observations, and then theories come only towards the end. I'm bringing this so that we are not, under the trouble of getting the theories and putting them in the background, even when we are not yet sure about our research. Students, let's not get confused. Yes, begin with the reality, begin with its manifestations, do the basic things, then situate them within the research paradigms, then get the kind of direction that you are taking. This was the experience from students, even in the very first session of 3 weeks ago. So one was saying, okay, I've already done data analysis, but now I'm refining my background. And we said, yes, good background is written at the end, not at the beginning. The one we write at the beginning is tentative. So I'm saying in the tentative background, don't be burdened of looking for these theoretical frameworks. If you are beginning with the theory, please put it there. If you are using a grounded approach, yes, you can think about the theoretical parameters without going deep into how they are going to frame you, how they are framing your study. And therefore, this induction and deduction approach is also going to influence the kind of integration that we are using. At what level are we using it, and with what kind of results are we seeking to achieve? It's 5:15. I thank you very much, and I give it back to you, Dr. Walugembe, to allow people share their experience. And when they ask questions, questions shouldn't come to me. Students' questions should come to the entire audience. We are a community of philosophers, and we have experienced it differently at different times. Back to you, Dr. Walugembe. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dennis Musenguzi, for your detailed discussion on the issue of integrating philosophy and theory in the background. You have taken us back to basic issues of understanding what is philosophy, the basic issues of understanding what is theory, and your hint on the paradigms and the importance in building our research areas of study. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to appreciate Dr. Musenguzi for the preparation he made. Some of you have made presentations, you know how long it takes to prepare such a presentation. It takes longer compared to the time of presenting it. So I'd like to appreciate the time he put in before presenting the presentation here, for the benefit of the PhD scholars and the students online. We are going to have an interaction. I think it may take a little bit of time, given that we have approximately 45 minutes. We can push this discussion, a bigger discussion, which we thought of having panels next week. But at this moment, I would like to invite comments from the senior colleagues and also questions from the audience to the senior colleagues too. In our communication, we normally say that you shall have senior colleagues available for research, supervision, and support. So please post your comments in the chat, post your questions in the chat. There are many, a number of senior colleagues today whom we can always invite to support Dr. Musenguzi in trying to respond to these issues. Allow me re-echo and re-announce and recognize them. We appreciate the presence of our own mentor, Professor Joseph Fontai. Then we have Dr. Edith Vasaliwa, Dr. Grete Shene, Dr. Isaac Newton, Dr. Gideon Nkurunziza, and Professor James Kagari. And then I have seen some others, but in the meantime, let us take the questions on so that we can actually move. Can I get a few supplements here and there to Dr. Musenguzi before you go into the Q&A? I don't know whether Dr. Gideon is on and Professor Kagari. Dr. Gideon, any comments on this presentation?
Thank you, Dr. Hamad. I would like to, first of all, thank Dr. Musenguzi for that insightful presentation. I believe before I add some comments, it would be good maybe to first hear from the students, specifically those who have challenges on those areas that we give more guidance. Though what I could say is that given the different disciplines we are having, indeed, as Dr. Musenguzi has elaborated, sometimes we pick interest in the paradigms to use because we have read through different dissertations, especially for beginners. But it is important to understand the issue you're addressing and the central argument you're having. That helps you to realign your theories, the philosophy and methodology. Of course, I know it is already part of methodology, but even the methods as well. So basically, Chair, allow me to first listen from especially students. This is very, very important. I submit you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gideon. There was a hand from Scholastic Tiguriera. Please raise, you can unmute and raise your question, and then we shall go into the written chats. But I just wanted to make other members active so that we can actually engage in the discussion as we support Dr. Dennis Musenguzi. Please, Scholastic Tiguriera, you can raise your concern as I move to other senior colleagues.
Thank you very much, Dr. Warugembe. I'm not a senior colleague, I'm a student. The question is directed to Dr. Musenguzi. I thank him very much for his elaborate presentation. It has clarified some of ideas on philosophy and theory, the integration. But I would like him to throw more light on, when I was reading, I found something about abductive, between inductive and deductive, but I didn't quite understand it. I think this is the best time for me to get a clear understanding of that abductive kind of philosophy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that. I think let me confirm just whether other senior colleagues can be able to make a contribution. Professor Kagari, are you on?
Hello, thank you, Dr. Warugembe.
Yes, Professor.
And I think I'll join others to thank Dr. Musenguzi for this inspiring presentation. I think somebody's already posting something in the chat about issues of when you say you are using pragmatism, when you say you are using critical realism, and Dr. Musenguzi talked about it, and I think we need to clarify these issues better. But also, in his presentation, he was talking of the first students' presentation and discussions, where Mr. Wabukara, he was more positivistic. And I think Dr. Msinguz was saying, I think he's more oriented to qualitative paradigm than being positivistic. So I'm looking at the situation where both, if they were supervisors or facilitators, one is positivistic and the other one is interpretivistic. And they are helping the supervisee to shape his her research. And they have to agree on the way forward. And so I think there's a tendency to make sure that these people agree on a way forward, whether they are going to do the mixed methods or one overrules the other. And even when it comes to publications, there are some journals which are a bit more on positive side than qualitative side. So all these issues come out during the process of doing research and publication. So I think these are issues which are really pertinent and we should discuss them to help the supervisees. So I submit Dr. Wargebe. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. James Kagari. We shall probably call you back in case there is any other issue that you can respond to in the chat. Allow me to go to a few questions we have. There's a question from Auma John Mario. Somebody is saying, the doctor, in qualitative research, we don't have research hypothesis, but research questions. More clarifications, please. Auma, I don't know at what level are you in the PhD, but you could possibly help us understand what level you are on at the PhD level. I hope, Dr. Msenguzi, that you talked about this very, very, very clearly, but there's a question coming on board regarding the same. You can actually invite you to respond to that later. I'm not sure whether Professor Ntai wanted to bring in his comments now, but we can possibly take another question from George Changa. George is saying, I seek more clarity on whether critical realism, positivism paradigms are the same. If they are not, how do they differ in terms of philosophy and research design? Critical realism and positivism paradigms. I think we can add on one last one, Professor. The last one between deductive and inductive, and then somebody introduced something in between deductive and inductive. Yes, Professor, Dr. Msenguzi, if you can, and then colleagues can supplement to those questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Scholastica, you talked about abduction. No, it is not abduction. It is deduction and induction. Let me first make that correction. You talked about, you read abduction and induction. It is deduction and induction. Now, in logic, we have different structures of arguments, and I will bring this even to the theories. We have different structures of argument. The deductive argument, you are making a conclusion based on the reality, how it exists. And we kind of use, we call it syllogistic kind of thinking and reasoning. Let me give you a simple example. All students at MOOBS are very intelligent. Scholastica is a student at MOOCs. Therefore, Scholastica is intelligent. That is deductive thinking. You already have a reality from which you are generating a conclusion. If it is true that all students at MOOCs are intelligent, and it is true that Scholastica is a student at MOOCs, then it becomes obvious that therefore she is intelligent. We are making a conclusion on the basis of reality. In terms of research, we are talking about deductive approach as a method of theory testing. There is a particular theory with its parameters and assumptions. You've conducted empirical research and you are able to establish the conformity between the theoretical research, the empirical research with the theoretical parameters. And you are testing theory. So that it uses a deductive kind of approach. I started from the logic point of view that in the deductive arguments, you are making a conclusion on the basis of the reality. If we think democracy is the best form of government, and Museveni's government has been democratic, therefore Museveni has had a good government. It is as simple as that. Someone is talking about human resource practices. If we are saying that the recommendable human resource practices are A, B, C, D, and this organization has been employing them, therefore the organization is on the right track. That is a deductive thinking, deductive reasoning. So in terms of theory testing, you are using the parameters of the theory vis-a-vis the empirical findings that you have established, and you can test and either verify or falsify your reality. So it is more into the theory testing, it is more into the structure of reasoning. When we come to inductive thinking, yes, there is a reality, but your conclusion, although consistent with the reality, it goes beyond the reality. Let me use a simple example that is not even related to research. We know every time Professor Ntai is in office, he comes with his old Volkswagen and parks it under a tree behind his office. And both staff and student have known he comes with it, he never misses it. Now, when I come and ask you, is Professor Ntai around today? One might be tempted to peep in the window and see whether the vehicle is in the parking or not. And when it is not in the parking, say, no, he's not around today because his vehicle is not there. And then philosophically, we are going to ask, is that, a coherent and congent kind of argument? Today, he may have come with different means, not necessarily with his, but we are making a conclusion that goes beyond what we have observed. And it is based on probabilistic kind of thinking, that if there is this, then probably this is also the right thing. And that is an approach that we fundamentally use when we are generating new theories. In other words, you create the data and then you move on. And so, someone is putting up a hand. I hope it is related to this. Yeah, someone who is putting up a hand, can I take the role of the moderator and ask you if it is related to the things that I'm explaining? If it's not related, you can ask that a little later. So the inductive and the deductive approaches are consistent with the logical structures of such kinds of arguments, and will therefore extrapolate them and use them in research in terms of, as I mentioned in my presentation, sometimes we do theory testing, at other moment we do theory generation. So induction and deduction is either related to knowledge, theory testing or theory application, but it can also be used, the two concepts can be used beyond the ambit of theory to reflect on the way we make our argument and whether our conclusions are consistent, whether they are contained within the arguments that we are making. And as I gave the example, if you say, okay, for a good government, for government to be good, it should employ the following standards of democracy. If an organization is to be properly managed, the following principles should be, and your empirical data is to establish whether these exist or they do not exist. So when you have the main argument, someone who is going to research on human resource practices and the performance, is saying in human resource management, there are certain standards in terms of practice that we need to see. So we need now to have those parameters. And then he's saying that if these are employed in local governments, they are going to improve performance. We need to know the ingredients of performance. Now, when you go and conduct the study, and you realize that indeed these standards do exist, and in existing, performance has improved. But you can also find that actually standards exist, but performance has not necessarily improved. So, I mean, you are making the conclusion on the basis of reality. Someone can say, yes, it is a good organization, the principles are in place, and indeed, performance has improved. One can say, yes, it is a good organization, the principles are in place. Unfortunately, the data does not sufficiently say that performance has improved. You are making a conclusion on the basis of the existing knowledge. That is the deductive approach. Induction, you go beyond. You are looking on the findings and you go beyond. So in terms of theory testing and theory generation, deductive is more to theory testing, induction is more to theory generation, because you are basing on the findings to generate, new kind of theories. That is Scholastica. I hope that tentatively helps without going into the details. Someone asked about qualitative with hypotheses and with questions. Hypotheses are fundamentally quantitative tools. Now, if you can formulate hypotheses that can be tested qualitatively, and it is your approach, it's rarely used. And again, as someone has observed, we have, as I talked about, the traditions. When you go to the positivist tradition, within the American tradition, positivism is entirely quantitative. But within the UK tradition, you can have positivism that has both qualitative and quantitative. So if that is the case, if you fall in that kind of tradition, it is possible to use conceptual, hypotheses within a qualitative research. But it is something that is predominantly within the quantitative kind of research. If I can explain more, when we say quantitative, we talk about numbers and figures and percentages. And when we talk about qualitative, we are talking about texts and explanations and narratives. Now, what we need to be clear about is that the presence of numbers and figures does not necessarily make the study quantitative. All the presence of numbers does not mean that the study is quantitative, or you cannot have numbers in the qualitative study. In fact, some qualitative studies can actually learn from the statistics, even without using a mixed method approach. What makes a study quantitative is that you are going to use quantitative methods of data collection and analysis, and you are going to make observations and conclusions on the basis of the quantitative methods that you've used. But sometimes we can use quantitative data to generate, some kind of evidence that we can interrogate qualitatively. So, and there you are using existing quantitative data. So, ladies and gentlemen, qualitative does not mean you do not have statistics, you do not have figures, but you are not using a quantitative approach to analyzing those figures. So one can say, okay, there is a study conducted by World Bank and it has statistics, and these are the conclusions that it made. And I want to use the same conclusions to test them qualitatively. And my study is going to remain only qualitative. So the presence of numbers does not necessarily make a study quantitative. And But usually we use both quantitative and qualitative when we are mixing the methods. And of course, there is a time when we had this detailed discussion. Maybe it will come at a later stage. When you mix, how much do you mix and to what extent do you mix? Is it one objective that is quantitative and the other qualitative? Do you have quantitative and qualitative across all the objectives? So, in other words, you can use some quantitative data even within a qualitative research. And some people think mine is qualitative, I don't have numbers, I don't need figures. The only difference is when you are using the quantitative methods to collect data and analyze the data and make conclusions on the basis of the qualitative approach. Then that makes it quantitative. Others at PhD level, they talk about, percentages, and then say no, percentages may not necessarily even be, serious quantitative that you are dealing. But again, as Professor Kagari mentioned, we are oriented towards different paradigms. There could be more details and there could be more even variations. For me, I'm just stating, things more generally. But when you go deeper into the fields, there are some variations and there's some, accepted differences that we put across. What I'm explaining, quantitative, is only when you are using quantitative methods of data analysis and generation and analysis. But I can use an existing quantitative data set and I use it qualitatively. So these are the few differences. Now someone is talking about positivism and post-positivism. I will handle that together with critical realism and post-positivism. Again, we have different scholars who present these things differently, depending on their standpoint. I started with paradigms. The oldest paradigm is positivism. And if we have sociologists in this class, you go back to the birth of sociology, whether it is Auguste Comte or Herbert Spencer, those original guys. They are the ones who are using the scientific methodology to apply to the social sciences. And we call positivism the dominant science. So in other words, positivism becomes kind of a standard. But positivism is oriented towards quantitative approach. And later on, other scholars like the phenomenologists are saying, no, human reality cannot be studied in the same way as other physical realities. Because positivism, by the way, was born with Industrial Revolution, with the Renaissance and Industrial Revolution within the natural sciences, where there was objectivity, where there was intersubjective testability, and the question of validity and replicability. And it was first used in the natural sciences. So the social scientists wanted to use this methodology and apply it also to the social sciences. And they are saying even human reality can be predicted, can be controlled, and can be studied in the same way you study the natural kind of phenomenon. And that's how the positivism was born within the social sciences. And it came as a dominant science within the social science. And that's why in the intellectual quarrels, many people think that for a PhD research to be a PhD research, it must take the quantitative approach. Or at least it should have something quantitative. And then we also have the contestation. Can you do a purely quantitative research at PhD? Can you do a purely qualitative research at PhD? Can you choose to mix? Again, these are unresolved questions. Some institutions, especially depending on the disciplinary orientation, will say, no, you must have a bit of quantitative, especially in business and economics and statistics. But when it comes to the theoretical, the qualitative fields, people say, no, you can have a purely qualitative study. We have these intellectual quarrels and intellectual, issues and problems. Some scholars, some supervisors will say, no, you must have something quantitative. Others will say, no, you must mix. Others will be more liberal and say, no, either of them, as long as you get the right methods and kind of approaches. But positivism is the dominant science within the social sciences. And it assumes that knowledge exists out there and it must be studied in a particular way. Now, someone is asking the difference between, yes, positivism and how it relates with either post-positivism or with critical realism. Now, positivism is based on empiricism, on reality. It is kind of a realist paradigm, because it is saying reality exists and it can be discovered. Others are saying, no, the critical realism came as a critique of positivism. Now, I don't know whether making things simpler or even more difficult. Critical realism came as a criticism, a critique of positivism. It is saying, no, these people are saying reality exists as if reality is like a cow where you say, I have 20 heads of cattle in my kraal. They say reality is more complex. And they are saying, even if reality exists out there, our minds are not perfect enough to understand reality in its entirety. So our minds can even distort the reality the way it is. So then critical realism is the one which is saying positivism is naive realism. Naive, because it assumes that everything exists there and it is okay and it is good. So critical realism is kind of critical and is saying, no, reality may exist, but we may not discover it the way it is. Reality may even not exist perfectly. And that's what gave rise to the mixed approach, that you may not quantify it, but you can understand it using an array of other methods and other approaches. So some scholars call that post-positivism. Others call it pragmatism. And that's where, you know, these concepts now begin to change a bit. But what is important? Positivist orientation, quantitative. Critical theory, critical realism is more of a critique, but it gave birth to post-positivism, all pragmatism. In other words, when you use critical theory and post-positivism, you are essentially operating under the same theoretical framework of analysis. And it's how I can explain it. So some call the product of critical realism post-positivism, others call it pragmatism, because depending on where they are and how they are analyzing, pragmatism is practical doing, things that are working or not. So post-positivism, critical realism, and pragmatism, they fall under the same tradition of mixed method approach. And you can even use them interchangeably, but depending, no, not interchangeably. You must explain each and see which one suits you the most, but they fall within the same tradition. Mr. Walugembe, Dr. Walugembe, I hope I've responded to the questions that were raised to me.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Denson Singuzi. I'm currently in position to say that you have really responded to some of these issues. We really appreciate that detailed response to some of the questions. And I think you have given the questions some bit of justice. We have 13 minutes to 6 a.m. I will give Dr. Michael Koche, Professor Michael Koche, 3 to 4 minutes. He wanted to, I think, give a few additions, and then I will invite Professor Ntai also 5 to 6 minutes for his additions. If there's one question that may come in between there, can be responded to in the process, and then we proceed. Today I would request Dr. Nkurunziza Gideon. He said he will bring in his comments at the end. I would request Dr. Gideon Nkurunziza to bring his comments at the end, and also do a wrap up and give us the closing remarks and a prayer. If there are more questions, please let them come in here now. But in the meantime, let me give Dr. Michael Koche, who is one of our very, very senior colleagues on the platform and has been able to give extensive knowledge in the same area to come and give his supplement to Dr. Dennis's presentation. Yes, Professor Michael, please click on unmute.
Okay, thank you so much, moderator. I'm sorry I woke up late today because I had to take some medication. Anyway, I must begin by appreciating Dr. Dennis for such a wonderful presentation in the time I logged in. And I just want to supplement some of the issues, especially the question from Scholastica. I think on top of what Dr. Dennis has raised, some scholars again emerged who believe that induction and deduction didn't appropriately do justice because those are approaches which are used by positivist and interpretivist. Of course, all of us appreciate, like Dr. Dennis highlighted, that a positivist scholar normally begins from a point of observation. So it is because of the realities which are clear out of the world there that normally somebody who begins from positivism, normally using an inductive approach, will begin from theory, then state his hypothesis, and then conduct his observation, and then confirm or reject the theory. In that process, it means that person has created knowledge. Now, when you come to abductive, just like Dr. Dennis highlighted, now very purely from an interpretivist perspective, you begin from observations, then eventually you come up with a theory. Now, especially in 2005, Kovac and Spence came up with an argument that these two approaches didn't critically provide approach was not very appropriate, especially for mixed methods. It didn't give a clear way on how you deal with somebody who is coming from a pragmatist or a critical realism perspective. So they came up with two arguments, especially what Scholastica was talking about. Some people came up with what we call abductive, and then other people came what we call retroductive. And I think you can, Scholastica, you can go further and research and read more about abduction. But simply, the abductive scholars believe that you begin from a positivist perspective, and then you, in the process of mixing methods. And of course, especially like you find there are some mixing of methods whereby instead of having basically research questions, you are beginning maybe from quantitative perspective on the same phenomena. And then you either confirm using interpretive perspective. So Kovac and Spence actually argue that there are some studies which need abduction or abductive approach. You begin with deduction, then conclude with induction. So in other words, it means that abductive approach, you begin from the process of investigating the same thing using a theory, then now you go to the process of maybe administer interviews to confirm, and I've seen some studies which are like that. Now, when you come with retroduction, there are some retroduction. Again, the same scholars, Kovac and Spence, they elaborately dealt with those two approaches of reason, sometimes called abductive reasoning or retroductive reasoning. And some scholars, again, they use one, meaning either process. But Kovac and Spence is very clear, and even Reason, there's another guy called Reason, he also dealt with these techniques. So maybe you can go further and read further, but retroduction, you begin from Like, and you have seen some studies where people begin from a process of, because you don't understand the phenomena, administer in conduct interviews, then come up with a research question, a questionnaire, then now you administer the question on a large audience. That is reproduction. And then abductive, you begin from a positive, then positivist perspective, then go into the qualitative. I just wanted to add that, but I must say that the presentation by Dr. Dennis Musinguzi has been very, thank you so much, moderator. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Professor Michael Koche, our senior colleague and my senior moderator, and also a senior presenter on the platform for that addition and discussion. But I think somehow, somewhere, is where Professor Dr. Dennis Musinguzi mentioned that after positivism and interpretivism, a number of names came in to define critical realism. And those so many names, they could be very minor or differences in application, but I think he gave something close to that. But we thank all our senior colleagues and we thank them for being current. That is great. I don't know whether Professor is now back. Professor Ntai,
yes, Dr. Ahmed.
Yes, Professor.
Are you hearing me?
Yes, we are hearing you very well.
Yes, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity, the unsolicited opportunity to say something, especially when my colleagues have already made very interesting statements in their presentations. Yes, I will start with what Professor Michael has just mentioned. Yes, traditionally, we are used to the inductive and deductive reasoning. And I'm sure when you look through the various books on research methods, you'll find these approaches. However, new ideas are emerging to try and explain what is happening. And there is no specific approach that is considered to be ideal. Each one of them will have weaknesses. So for those who believe that the inductive and deductive reasoning have weaknesses, because in deductive reasoning, you start with a general rule and you end with the specific conclusions, which are considered to be always true. In the inductive reasoning, you start with the specific observations and you move to the general conclusions that may be true in this case. So there's a general belief that inductive reasoning has weaknesses because no amount of empirical data will necessarily enable theory building, right? Especially if you are dealing with theory building. You can't have sufficient information to come up with a comprehensive theory. Again, drawing from the types of theories that we discussed some time back here, right? Where we have the grand theories, the mid-range theories, and the local theories. So you can't have sufficient information to explain cosmos, what's happening in the cosmos here. And of course, there's a general thinking that abductive reasoning, right, will try to address these weaknesses, actually the inductive and deductive reasoning. So in abductive reasoning, then the research process starts with the surprising facts, right? Because as you try to build a theory, either using the inductive or deductive, right? And aware of the fact that you have weaknesses, right? You end up with results that could be surprising, right? And I'm sure many people who attend the Viva VOS PhD Viva, you'll discover that panel members or even the public ask a question that, was there anything surprising, or is there anything that is surprising in your work? So in other words, if you have those surprising facts, or what we call puzzles, right, then abductive reasoning starts with those surprising puzzles or results, and then continue with the process of trying to think through and generate more information to try and come up with the best prediction, right? So in other words, you start with incomplete observations in abductive reasoning, and you end with the best prediction that you think may be true, right? So as you can see, when following an abductive approach, the researcher seeks to choose the best explanation among many alternatives in order to try and explain those surprising results or puzzles which were identified at the start of the research process. Possibly this is what seems to have come in as a way of thinking, right, or reasoning about certain things. So, and of course, in the course of explaining these surprising facts or puzzles, the researcher can actually combine both what we call the numerical and cognitive reasoning. So you go into philosophical engagements to try and explain some of these things. So as you can see, it's a method that tries to deal with the weaknesses of the two perspectives. Now let me move to, I think that will do, right? Now in research, we are concerned with the really coming up with explanations about reality. So in other words, that's why your research will take either a theory building approach or theory testing. And those are the two basic ones. And when you are undertaking your research or your PhD, you should know where you lie. If you are testing a theory, you should know you are testing a theory. And that's why sometimes people or some researchers do not allow you to combine theories, right? Because the major objective at that particular point is to test a theory, right? And for some of you who went through some of the discussions we had last year, I think at the beginning of the year in 2022, we went through the theory building process, right? And of course, we ended up with the theory testing, because after you have built a theory, that theory must be tested. And it must actually stand the test of time. And if it stands the test of time, then it will be defined as probably a grand theory, or probably a mid-range theory, or probably a local theory in that perspective. So at the PhD, even when you are undertaking your PhD, you do this unconsciously, and sometimes you do not even know what you are doing, but I can assure your PhD may result into a theory, right, unknowingly. And some of the theories that we use today, we are actually developed by those fellows who are undertaking their undertaking their PhD studies, but at some stage, right, their work, people started really citing their work, right, And they gained that popularity in the discipline, right? And the disciplinary scholars saw this as the masterpiece that explained different situations and realities. And therefore, later on, these works actually became theories. And I can cite a few. If you look at the works of Newell Captain, right, you'll discover that it's in that kind of perspective or line of thinking. And there are so many others, right, that fall in that category. So you never know, and that's why you should do your work very well. You never know that your work may actually result into either a local theory, if you're explaining certain local aspects here that are very unique, that some of the theories, like the grand theory and the mid-range, have actually failed to explain. Right, it will be local because it can't be applied in various situations, but that would be a theory anyway, right? So what we are saying here is that there are two major activities, right, when we are undertaking research. One, we are either testing a theory, right, and two, building a theory. And when you start combining 2 or 3 theories together, right, to explain reality, you engage in the process of theory building without knowing. Right. And that's why when you look at any particular theory that has been developed over the years, there is extensive literature review that is done and extensive citations of other scholars' work, right, that feeds into that particular concept, that particular theory, right. Just pick any one of them and look at the way it is developed, the assumptions, the reality it explains, and the methodologies and so forth. You'll find that kind of thing happening. So we engage in either theory building or probably theory testing in this case. Now, of course, as you can see, if you are building a theory, the task of philosophy of science from this viewpoint will be concentrated in answering one basic question, right? And that question is, in what sense and to what degree can we trust the results of science, right? Because you engage in this process, yes, there's a lot of critical thinking that goes into it. There's a lot of consultation, right? You move forward and then backwards because the number of things that you must cross-check, and you want to verify these results, right? And that's why many times when you go into methodology, it's a bit rigorous. Then you go into validation and so forth. When the finding seems to be a little bit strange, right? And by the way, some people don't even bother about this, but you go back and cross-check the methodology. Maybe there's something wrong within the methodology. You also cross-check your philosophical perspective of thinking in this case, right? So as you can see, you will have 2 major aspects at this level, and that is really discovery and justification, right? So you engage into the process of discovery, and that's what science is all about. If many of you have read the works of Karl Popper and other philosophers, right? And people like Hans Reichenbach, for those who have consulted his work around 1891 and so forth, right? You have this process of discovery and the process of justification, and that is really very important in this case. So the theory building process then is very important, just as the theory testing is also very important. But you should know where you fall, right? But you can't say that I'm in the middle of theory testing, in the middle of theory development, right? Although that may also work if you have a very sound philosophical orientation. So the other thing that we need to understand is that when you are building a theory, right, varying philosophical orientations may be particularly useful, right, especially for the specific phases of theory building. And I gave you those phases some time back. And of course, we all know where we start with the conceptualization, right? Go through the entire process up to the end of trying to validate your results there. So we know those processes, the phases, and we know that we have various philosophical orientation that we are going to. And this is where actually theory meets philosophy or philosophy meets theory, but in most, because sometimes you start with your philosophical orientation, move on, build a theory, then when you are testing again, you've got a philosophical orientation. So either philosophy meets theory or theory meets philosophy. And as Dr. Msenguzi rightly said, sometimes you do some of these things unconscious and you do not even know what you are doing, but you are using a particular philosophy as you engage in the theory building process, right? So as you can see, let me just give you an example of a few things or a few perspectives that we call the philosophical orientations, because these are common philosophical orientations which are used in theory building, right? For example, you've heard about positivism, and I know that Dr. Dennis has been talking about it, the interpretism, for example, and critical science, right? But it doesn't mean that these are the only ones. There are many others, but as you engage in theory building, right, you have a philosophical orientation. Now, again, these are in theory building. Remember, you will end up with a theory, and for some individuals that you've seen starting out with the constructive, first of all, extracting reality out there, right? And they're able to describe it properly. And then at the end of it, they say, this is the applicable theory, right? The theory, because the reality has this aspect called A, concept A, it has concept B, concept C, and we see the relationships, right? And that's how they begin drawing arrows from A to B, B to C, and then A to C, and that kind of thing. They're engaging in the process, right? That is very important because that is mind mapping that gives you concepts that can be related in a diagram, right? That you later on call either conceptual model, theoretical model, right? And then they apply certain philosophical orientations to explain those things. Now, the moment you come up with a hypothesis, right, to try and explain those links, then you have started the process of theory building. And for many of you have looked up, for example, the definitions of what a theory is. You may have been told that a theory describes a specific realm of knowledge and explains how that knowledge works, right? And others will tell you that that theory is a coherent description of probably an explanation or representation of what we call the observed or the experienced phenomenon, right? Others will give it, there's usually a definition that I use that is very simple, right? I simply say it's a net that you cast out, right, to extract reality, right? If you're able to extract that reality and relate it, that net that brings together all those particular aspects is probably we refer to as a theory. Now, if you use positivistic, or what we call the positivist philosophical orientation in theory building, right? This will be based on the scientific methods and traditional hypothesis testing, right? And of course, you go into those things that Dr. Msenguzi said, and I don't want to go into details, right? Reality is objective, right? And your task as a theorist is to establish some laws and that can predict outcomes, right, in a certain system, or what we call human system activity, right? So that would be the positivistic kind of thinking, right? I've given just a simplistic perspective, but Dr. Msenguzi gave us an elaborated presentation of that. Now, if you go to interpretivism, then of course, there'll be arguments, right, in terms of how you are going to use it in the theory building process, right, or even in theory testing, right, because there's a lot of critical thinking that goes into it. You have a problem that you want to solve, right, and you must solve it in a logical manner, as Dr. Msenguzi highlighted last week, and I hope you still remember what he said. So you'll see here that in this case, you have issues, right, that are a little bit complex, right? So the individuals who believe in in this interpretive orientation, they will argue, right, that when you attempt to mimic the natural sciences, right, then you have some bit of loss of meaning, right? And that loss of meaning will prevent interpretation, which is very rich, right? So they will try to get some more information to try and aid in a deep understanding and description of why certain human activity occurs or may occur in certain situations, right? So again, you have that interpretism coming in there, right? So of course, you may also move to critical science, right, which will seek to surface and acknowledge the forms of exploitation and domination, right? So there are so many things that they will examine in this case to try and understand reality out there. Anyway, the point I'm making here, without going into any of these things, is the fact that when you are going into theory building, you will have philosophical orientations, and you are going to use those philosophical orientations. And the other important perspective that I want you to note here is that whereas we know that theory building is the engine of the scientific enterprise, right, and it has stages, for example, generation of hypothesis, the justification, and of course, selection of the data that you're going to use. We usually have those steps, and we say you start with this, move to this, etc., right? But we know as a factor of, as a matter of fact, that sometimes as you go through the thinking process, really you in your mind, you don't do things the way you put them on a piece of paper, that this is a chronological order. And for many of you who attended the first session that Bernard ably facilitated, right, he did say that even when you are starting out, thinking about your problem, right, or you want to write your statement of the problem, or probably the research gap that you want to address, right, derived from a critical review of literature, right, at that stage you even start thinking about the methods, right, that you're going to use, right. For example, if you're going to you know your criterion variable, you're going to measure it using a binary kind of approach, right? Or maybe if you have to choose between A and B, and he was saying, yes, think about a theoretical approach that you're going to use. So you are going into choice models, right? And then that kind of thing. And he was spot on, because that is what actually goes on into the mind of a researcher, although we tend to structure these things. I'm very sorry, Dr. Walugembe, for taking a lot of time, but allow me to stop there. But I thank Dr. Musinguzi, Professor Michael Koche, and the students for the contributions. I've been looking through the chat room, and I think most of the statements and the contributions were made are spot on. Right, over to you.
Thank you very much, Professor Joseph Fontaine, for that so detailed analysis and summary of theory. I think we have really come to on top of our discussion. We could have a few issues that could be pending here and there, but in the interest of time, we can have these issues being discussed at some time later. Allow me invite Dr. Gideon Nkurunziza to come and give a wrap-up and with a closing prayer. And hopefully we shall begin from there next week on seeing how can we bring in our professor's issues, and then we shall look at some of these issues. Thank you very much, Dr. Gideon. Please come and close the session with a prayer.
Oh. Okay, thank you, Dr. Hamad. Ideally, given the professor's conclusion in the contribution, what I heard has been swallowed. But what message do I have to give is that we must look at coherence. You need to go back, especially students. This is the message to the students. Go back, reflect on your work, look at the coherence. First of all, answer the two questions. One, are you looking at theory testing or theory building? Are you combining both? If you combine, are you doing 2 PhDs? Don't you think it is too much? If it is not too much, well and good. Bite what you can swallow. The next is look at your central research question. Is your central research question well aligned with the theory testing or theory building? Go and look at, again, your philosophical stance. Is your philosophical stance answering the central research question? What is your ontological position? What is your epistemological position and the axiology in terms of nature and values of your research? I think basically those are key aspects you need to reflect on and see whether there is that coherence, plus other areas that have been highly elaborated. Ideally, for me, I may not add much, but that's what I can say now. And also trying to reflect on the